Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this online information session on the Oxford Executive MBA. My name is Jonathan Dover, and I'm the Associate Director for Programme Recruitment and Business Development. Thank you very much to everyone for taking the time to join us today. I hope that you and your families are safe and healthy at this time, and that today's session proves informative. This really is an opportunity for all of you to find out more about our programme and the school's mission. There will be an opportunity for you to submit some questions over the course of this presentation, and I will come to those at the end of the session. I can't promise that I'll be able to get through all of them, but I'll certainly do my best to. Before we get started, I actually wanted to flag another online event that's taking place next week. So this one will feature our EMBA Programme Director, Bettina Cosile, and she'll be in conversation with one of our current participants from our September 18 class. They'll be discussing the impacts of COVID-19 and how we as a school have responded, both in terms of programme delivery and more broadly. So do look out for that one on the website, and that'll be coming up next week. So when I first started working at Oxford Side 3 years ago, one of the first people I met was a lady called Katie Bedborough. She was a member of our January 17 cohort. Now, in many ways, Katie was very similar to a number of the finance professionals that I'd met during my previous career in executive search. Very polished, very articulate, and an expert in her chosen field. But what was clear to me was that this wasn't enough for her. She really wanted to apply her skills in a different context and above all become a more effective leader. And it was a privilege to watch her develop over the course of her 21-month EMBA journey. And she is now the CFO of a business which uses virtual reality to treat a variety of mental health issues. Now that's just one of many case studies which I think help to illustrate the transformative nature of our programme, but some more about that later. Normally, I would ask you all if anyone could name the building that you can see on this slide, but since we are together virtually, this of course is the Radcliffe Camera in Oxford. Now this is the kind of image most people have in their mind when they think of Oxford, the dreaming spires, the 800 years of tradition, etc. Side Business School is a relatively young business school in global terms, but we have the advantage of being embedded within a world-class historic university. Think of Side Business School as being a department within Oxford University. In addition to the global network you will be part of at the school, as a participant on the EMBA programme, you will also be a member of an Oxford college, which gives you access to a much wider network of faculty, research, and alumni. In contrast to the university, Oxford Side is a young, dynamic business school with state-of-the-art facilities to support a world-class community of faculty and research. For example, the Oxford Hive is the UK's first immersive virtual meeting and presentation experience. In the extraordinary times we now find ourselves, this kind of capability has been vital in enabling us to keep delivering an outstanding programme for our EMBA cohorts. It certainly isn't business as usual at the moment, more like business unusual. And at Oxford Side, we feel it's important to recognise that and to tackle the situation head on. For now, we hope to be able to welcome our latest cohort to Oxford on September the 28th this year, many of whom will be seen burning the midnight oil in the 24-hour Sainsbury library you can see here. Those of you who've been following the school recently will have seen that the Oxford Foundry has been very much at the forefront of our efforts to combat the challenges posed by COVID-19, scaling current ventures and helping to find new entrepreneurial solutions. The Foundry is a startup incubator designed to act as a forum where students from the business school and the wider university can get together and discuss business ideas. And here you can see our Dean, Peter Tufano, in conversation with Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, and this was at the Foundry's launch in 2018. The Foundry is just one example of the emphasis on entrepreneurship, not only with inside business school, but across the wider Oxford ecosystem. If you're looking for an MBA program that will help you further your entrepreneurial goals, these organizations will prove invaluable. Now, you're probably all wondering what you'd be letting yourselves in for if you were to successfully apply for the program. So between 15 and 17 week-long modules, depending on your elective choices and whether you start the program in January or September. This means effectively that you would travel to Oxford for 1 working week out of every 5 or 6 over the course of the program. Each class will be made up of around 70 students from across the globe, and there'll be more detail on that later in the presentation. Your learning will be made up of 12 core courses and 4 electives. This gives you the opportunity to tailor your Executive MBA to suit your particular motivations and areas of interest. Here you can see the 12 core subjects that you will take. Each of these encompasses the central themes of entrepreneurial thinking, strategic leadership, and global complexity and risk. 2 of the core modules are delivered overseas, so global rules of the game in India and business in emerging markets in China. These weeks will be structured slightly differently to the weeks in Oxford, giving you an opportunity to meet with local corporates and meet with local entrepreneurs also. Looking at the electives now, 2 of these are also taught overseas. They are Inclusive Business, which is delivered in association with the University of Cape Town in South Africa, while Entrepreneurial Finance takes place in Palo Alto in Silicon Valley and features guest speakers including Reid Hoffman, an Oxford alum and co-founder of LinkedIn. So what would a typical module week look like? International participants would often arrive over the course of the preceding weekend in preparation for the start on Monday morning. As you can see, it's a pretty packed schedule, starting with breakfast at 8 a.m. daily. Typically, you will cover 2 or 3 courses in any individual module week. So marketing, strategy, and technology and operations management in this example. It's also worth flagging that on the Thursday of each module week, you will have dinner at one of the Oxford colleges. And that rotates on each week that you're in town. This is a great way to network with your classmates, faculty, and other members of that college. So again, another example of how outside the business school, there is another network that you can access across the wider university. And these college dinners are an excellent opportunity to do that, as well as getting to know your classmates better and really developing those in-depth relationships. At this point, I just wanted to say a quick word about the method of assessment on the program. So only 2 subjects are actually assessed by formal written examination. They are, unsurprisingly, accounting and business finance, while the remainder are assessed by a mixture of group work and individual assignments. Also a note on careers. So you will have access to the same careers service as on the full-time MBA, but it will be very much up to you what you make of that. The reason for this is quite simply that many Executive MBA students do not want a one-size-fits-all career service, and that is due mainly to the seniority of the cohort. It is simply not an area of interest for some, but I do want to emphasize that career service is very much there, and you as an Executive MBA student would have access to all of the same resources if that's what you indeed choose to do. So what will your Executive MBA class look like? On average, participants will have around 15 years of work experience, with at least 5 years in a strategic management role. We feel that this is imperative to facilitate a high level of discussion and debate within the classroom. You will see here as well, amongst some other statistics, that 34% of our January class this year are female, and increasing female participation across the school is a big focus for us. There are usually between 30 and 35 different nationalities represented in each class of 70. So what we have here is a truly global program. Typically 25% will be made up of UK nationals, with the rest from countries scattered across the globe. We look for all of our applicants to have that sense of global perspective, and our applicants tend to be people who are keen to engage with peers from different cultures. In one particular cohort, there were 4 students who commuted from Australia for each module. This is quite an extreme example, but it does help to illustrate the global nature and reach of the program. Up until the Wednesday of each module week, you'll typically be able to find someone who is recovering from jet lag, so you will always be amongst friends in that respect. It's also worth flagging that we have a school-wide target of 10% African participation across all of our programs. And certainly for the last few years for the Executive MBA, we have managed to surpass, and we've managed to hit, and in some cases surpass that. Now, as well as being internationally diverse, a typical Oxford Executive MBA cohort will usually have between 25 and 30 different industry sectors represented, some of which you can see here. Now, often these will be industries that you wouldn't expect to find in a typical MBA or Executive MBA classroom, which I think really adds to the discussion. So typically within each class, we will have people from healthcare, education, construction, the third sector. Yes, there will always be a good chunk of people from finance and from management consulting, but these tend to be people from those sectors who are keen to look at the world through a slightly different lens, and perhaps even move into a different sector post completion of the program. And that's fairly typical of the makeup of our class. It's also worth flagging the Linbury Scholarship here, because that's a scholarship that we've introduced recently aimed at individuals from the arts and culture sector. And that's enabled us to add another new dimension to each Executive MBA class. And in recent times, we've had a film director and a theatre producer taking a place within our Executive MBA class, which again really helps to bring an interesting perspective and something quite unique to the class when approaching leadership problems. And that aligned with the people we have from other sectors feeding into that really helps to make it quite a unique experience. One of the key differentiators for Oxford, I think, is exactly that. I think that within our Executive MBA class, you will, if you're looking to be exposed to a range of different industries and perspectives, rather than solely growing your network in your chosen specialism, then Oxford Side really does provide a great platform for this, and hopefully from some of the sectors that you can see represented here, that bears that out. Now, I don't want to say too much about funding and scholarships at this stage, because I'm aware that everyone's situation is unique. But I think it is fair to say that in most cases, participants fund their Executive MBA from a number of different sources. So with that in mind, I wanted to just highlight quickly a couple of things. Prodigy Finance is a loan provider that we work closely with at the school. And if you are exploring loan options, it's worth contacting them and checking what level of loan you could be eligible for and the repayment terms, and because both of these will vary on a case-by-case basis. We have a number of scholarships available for each class, all of which have different criteria and different award sizes attached. So if you would like to find out more about your eligibility for a particular scholarship, I would encourage you to reach out to one of our recruitment managers or the recruitment manager that's relevant for your region. Now, a number of you I know will be looking to secure funding from your employer. You can see here a quote from one of our alumni, Alistair Collier, who was able to successfully build a business case. In essence, you should be looking to demonstrate to your employer that there will be a tangible benefit to them from your participation on the program. Be specific, talk about the different elements of the program, and how they will directly impact your performance and consequently your impact on the business. There are some useful case studies on our website about this. And again, if you have any specific questions, I would encourage you to reach out to the recruitment manager for your region individually. Now on to the application itself. So you will need to provide copies of your undergraduate degree transcripts and a CV, unsurprisingly. A GMAT or an executive assessment score is required, although in certain circumstances it is possible to request a waiver. Again, speak to your recruitment manager to find out if this is something that you could qualify for. The main crux of the application are the 3 essay questions that you see highlighted here. The one I would really want to emphasize is the third of those questions. So that's where you're asked to discuss a challenge or a difficulty that you face in your current organization and how you would deal with that challenge. Now, the answer to this question often provides the basis for discussion in the interview, should you be successful in getting to that stage of the process. So it's really quite key that for this question, you're able to actually talk about your answer in an interview situation, go into quite a bit of depth, and be quite specific in terms of your involvement with that particular challenge. So it tends to work better if you're able to talk about something that was quite specific to you, rather than a higher level issue within the organization that perhaps you weren't directly involved in. So that's something to bear in mind when you get to that part of the application. You'll also see there that you're asked to provide two references. Now the references, we're quite flexible on who they come from. Usually for executive MBA applicants, they will come from professional referees, but it is known for people to use academic references as well. We would ask that one of them comes from someone who is either a current or a very recent line manager. But over and above that, we're quite flexible. And you know, for example, it has been known for people to use long-standing clients, or maybe even someone from within their organization who, you know, is another stakeholder other than other than who they face off to in their role on a day-to-day basis. So that's worth bearing in mind as well. You'll also need to provide either a TOEFL or an IELTS score if English is not your first language and you haven't studied English or worked extensively in English. And again, in terms of kind of the relevant scoring, etc., worth reaching out to the relevant recruitment manager to get some further detail on that. I've noticed that a couple of people have raised their hands using the function on the webinar. We're not actually going to use that. So if you do have a question, please do that through the Q&A function, and then when we get to the end of the presentation shortly, I'll answer as many of those questions as I can, basically. So if you can, ask your questions via that function rather than the raise hand function, that would be great. So here you can see the upcoming application deadlines for the program. We actually review applications on a rolling basis. So once you submit a completed application, you'll typically receive a response within 10 working days or so, regardless of whether it is a deadline or not. If you were to apply by May the 18th, you would be considered for a director scholarship for our September class. So that in terms of the September class, that's the next key upcoming deadline. We have actually extended the final deadline for applications for the September class to the 31st of July. Ordinarily, that would be an earlier deadline, but we've extended that due to the impact of COVID-19. So next steps. Now, again, I'm mindful that everyone will be at different stages in their thinking, but this hopefully sets out how the pre-application process works. We would very much encourage you to engage with us prior to starting work on an application. This will certainly give you the best chance of a successful outcome and hopefully streamline the process for you. Obviously, visiting the school is quite difficult at the moment, but I would encourage you to gather as much information as possible. And where possible, engage with not only us, but some of our alumni as you work your way through the application. And this is where it could all lead to. So here you can see our EMBA 13 class celebrating following their graduation, or following their end of course ceremony. Of course, this is merely symbolic of the successful navigation of a journey that they've been on, and everyone's will have been different. Some will have been promoted, some will have moved into a new sector, some will have made friends for life and expanded their professional network, but often it's a combination of these things and more. So I hope that's been a useful overview. What I want to do now is really get into some of your questions. I will try and get through as many as possible, but apologies in advance if I'm not able to get through all of them. So let's just have a look at some of the questions that have come through. Amit has asked, what is the minimum year's work experience required? I see the average is 15. Yeah, that's quite right. So on average, usually people will have around 14 or 15 years of work experience. The minimum that we look for is 10, and we look for people to have at least 5 years in a strategic management position. Now, that doesn't have to be necessarily team management. That could be, for example, managing looking after a portfolio of clients or something like that. And it really just depends on the industry context. And we are conscious that people coming from different industry sectors will have different interpretations, if you like, of what strategic management looks like. Craig has asked, is the program relevant or popular with entrepreneurs? And I think the short answer is yes. We have probably quite a good mix on the program of people who have come from large corporate organizations and people who are either entrepreneurs or small business owners. I think even the people who are coming from a corporate background, quite often they see the Executive MBA as a potential vehicle for moving into a more entrepreneurial role post completion of the program. Quite often people meet people on the program who they end up going into business with, and the entrepreneurship project that you do as part of the program quite often turns into a real world business post completion of it. So that's a good example of not only the entrepreneurial theme that runs through the program, but also the kind of practical application of that. So someone else has asked, will the September class be delivered online? That's quite a popular question at the moment, as you can imagine. I think the answer is it's too early to say. Certainly at the moment, we are very much planning for an in-person learning experience on September the 28th, and that's very much what we're working towards at the moment. At the same time, we're conscious that it's a very fluid situation, and exactly what the method of delivery for that program is going to look like come September the 28th. That could well still change between now and then, but for our purposes at the moment, we're still very much hoping to be able to deliver the program in person here in Oxford, and with all the great experiences that we've outlined in this presentation. A couple of other questions on a similar theme. This is one that's come up from a couple of people, Altai being one person. So is there a restriction on the application based on age? And the answer is no. The average age on the program is usually around 36 or 37. But there are always outliers to that at both ends of the spectrum. So within our current classes, we have people who are at one end of the scale in their sort of late 20s, but equally we have a couple of people in their early 50s as well. So really the key thing for us in terms of looking at applications is people who can demonstrate that strategic mindset and that strategic experience. So, it could well be that someone has 5 years of strategic management experience already under their belt at quite a young age. And equally, someone at the other end of the spectrum will have some really valuable experience to bring as well. So we don't want to kind of pigeonhole people and say that you must fall within a certain bracket in terms of work experience and age. We want to get the full spectrum, and I think provided you're able to demonstrate that strategic experience and that you've progressed well within your career and done some impressive and interesting things, that's probably more important than age specifically. The average always works out around that 36, 37 mark. But we don't worry about that too much. It's much more to do with your experience and your academic background. Fawaz has asked, how can I get in touch with a recruitment manager? So if you look on our websites, you'll be able to see which recruitment manager is relevant for your region. There's a drop-down menu on there. So for example, I'm the point of contact for people based in Africa. My colleague Gemma is responsible for applicants based in the UK, as well as Latin America and Oceania. My colleague Alejandra looks after applicants who are based in the Middle East and in Europe. And my colleague Anne Tabner would be the point of contact if you are based in either North America or Asia. But yeah, again, you can get their details on the website and reach out to them that way. So one that I've kind of touched on already, but someone has asked, do most participants come from large corporates? I think a lot do, but we certainly have a lot of entrepreneurs on the program as well. And as I mentioned previously, I think typically the applicants that we do receive from a corporate background quite often are looking to potentially either pivot into a different sector or even do something more entrepreneurial post completion of the program. So even the participants that we do have from the corporate world tend to have possibly a slightly different mindset. They're not necessarily looking at the executive MBA as an opportunity to climb the corporate ladder. Certainly it can be a good way of breaking a glass ceiling within your organization and really giving yourself that extra impetus in terms of your leadership skills, etc. But most people are looking to do something outside their current organization or potentially something with slightly different in terms of sector. So that's probably the best way of answering that one. Question from someone from a medical background. So we actually get quite a lot of applicants from healthcare and from people from medical backgrounds. And quite rightly, this person is asking, how can I demonstrate 5 years management experience? And we are very much conscious, as I said earlier, that in different industry contexts, management experience can mean a number of different things. So, I don't want to say that you need to be managing a huge team in order to qualify. That's not the case. But if you're someone from a medical background and you're able to demonstrate that either the medical research area that you're working in or the practice that you work in, you've been in some way involved in developing that, which a number of people from that kind of background will be, that would count as a strategic management experience. So I think again it's really important to emphasize that management experience, and we will look at it in your specific industry context, and we very much want to have a class that is sufficiently diverse and actually and actually has people coming from different industry sectors with different leadership skills. So we would very much encourage people in that situation to think about an application. I think it's not it's one thing to say I'm managing a team of 100 people. It's quite another thing to say that I'm involved in some really interesting research and I'm leading on those projects. So that kind of project management type experience is really relevant. So Saeed has asked that if someone in his position from a family business can be eligible, and again the answer is very much yes, because I think what it will come down to in your situation, Saeed, is whether or not you're able to demonstrate that strategic management experience the same as anyone else, really. The fact that you're working in a family business doesn't really matter from our perspective. What will be interesting to us is the depth and breadth of your experience, whether you're actually operating at a level within that business that affects the direction of it and the strategic decisions that are made. So provided that you're able to demonstrate that, then no, absolutely not. The fact that you're working in a family business would not preclude you from being eligible or from being able to put together a strong application. So one other question that has come up, and this is again probably one that's best kind of discussed on an individual basis with your recruitment manager. But Fahim has asked for an explanation around the criteria for a GMAT waiver, which I touched on in the presentation. Basically, if you are able to demonstrate a significant amount of management experience, usually 8 years plus, and or a very strong mathematical or quantitative background, that's pretty typical of someone who we would be able to grant a GMAT waiver to. In how that process works, basically when you submit your application, rather than submitting a GMAT or an executive assessment score with that application, you would submit a waiver request in the form of a written statement, basically outlining that you want to request the waiver and why you feel you should be considered for one. So what we'll be looking for there are specific examples of both your management experience and your quantitative skill. Then when you've submitted your application, that will be one of the first things that the admissions committee will look at. So they will make a decision at that point as to whether or not we are able to proceed with your application on that basis, or whether in fact we actually need a GMAT or an executive assessment score in order to progress with your application. We would certainly encourage everyone to take a GMAT or an executive assessment where possible, because quite simply it eliminates any doubt around that element of the application. But we are conscious as well that, you know, particularly for people in busy senior level roles, it's not always possible to find the time to prepare, certainly for a full GMAT test. And equally with the restrictions around COVID-19 at the moment, the test centres are closed, and GMAT are working on online versions for both the GMAT and the executive assessment. So those are options that are available now. But you know, we do try and be flexible on that, and if someone has the right kind of profile, then, you know, certainly we won't hesitate in granting the waiver. A good practical question actually on accommodation. Someone has asked whether or not we provide accommodation for students. The answer is that it's very much up to the individual participant to decide what they want to do in terms of accommodation. I think, you know, a lot of people will stay in university accommodation, which can be arranged through their college, and that's quite a good cost-effective way of doing it, and it's also a really good way of getting the kind of full university experience and living in an Oxford college. A lot of people decide to go a different route, so quite often people will use Airbnb or book an apartment in Oxford for each individual module week. Quite often, once you've done a couple of modules and got to know some people, groups will get together and book an apartment for each individual module week. So that's proved quite popular. Other people will stay in hotels as well. So again, depending on your budget and on what you would like to do. So that's you know, that's very much one for you to decide on. But, you know, again, we're certainly happy to offer any advice that we have on that. And a question on the interview process. So yeah, I mentioned earlier in the presentation that post completion of your application, you will have an opportunity to post completion of the application. You will have an interview, provided that you're successful in getting through the first stage, and that typically is a one-stage interview process with either our program director or another senior person from the school, usually lasting for around 40 minutes, and the interview will be either here in Oxford or certainly at the moment, and more generally if you're based internationally, that will happen via Skype. The interview itself will cover a range of topics. As I mentioned earlier, it will quite often focus primarily on the essays that you do as part of your application, but the interview as well is really designed to assess your kind of motivations for doing the program, and really get a sense for whether they are a good fit for the program and whether we are a good fit for you as a school. So a lot of it will center around your motivations, and it's very much designed to be almost a conversation rather than an interview. It's a two-way thing. It's designed for us to find out more about you, and for you to find out more about us as well. So you should always come to that interview with some good, sensitive, targeted questions around the program, really to demonstrate that you've done your research into the program, and that you're comfortable at that point that you know, you're applying for, you know, reasons that you understand and make good logical sense, rather than just kind of applying for an executive MBA because that's what you want to do. But it's important that you're able to show that you've actually researched the program thoroughly and that you think it aligns well with your business goals. Question here about academics. So as well as the work experience criteria, we do look for people to have a 2-1 degree at undergraduate level or equivalent from an overseas university. That is an important criteria, and you know, it's certainly what we look for in a typical application. However, there are examples of people who have been able to secure a place on the program without a first degree. Typically in that situation, it is very important that you are able to submit a strong GMAT or executive assessment score, really just to give the admissions committee comfort that you're going to be able to cope with some of the more academic elements of the program. Equally, if you're someone who has a really, you know, extensive amount of work experience and professional experience, and you know, we have people on the program who are, you know, C-suite level and have sort of 25, 30 years experience in some cases. If you're someone who falls into that bracket and you don't have a 2-1 at undergraduate level, then you know, clearly there may well be a little bit more flexibility around that academic requirement. Onike has asked what is the core sector focused and whether specifically that is finance. I think, you know, hopefully the presentation kind of gave a good overview of the program content. I think the best way of describing the Oxford Executive MBA is that it is, you know, it's a broad general management program, so it will cover a range of different elements. And yes, there is a finance element to it. You know, clearly people from a finance background will probably find those parts of the program quite straightforward, whereas someone from perhaps, you know, a marketing or more creative background may find those more challenging. But equally, the tables will be turned when you then move to other elements of the program. So I think, you know, there are key themes that cut through the program, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation. But there certainly isn't one particular sort of academic discipline that it focuses on, and the program is very much designed to kind of give you the toolkit to be a more effective leader, and to kind of in many ways kind of plug some of the gaps that perhaps some of you feel that you have in your, not only your leadership toolkit, but also in terms of subject matter as well. And for that reason, you know, if to take the finance element as an example, you know, that finance element of the program is designed to, you know, be accessible for everyone who is on the program. So yes, it will be straightforward for those coming from a finance and a financial services background, but equally, it should be accessible to people from different backgrounds who, for perhaps the finance aspect is perhaps a little bit intimidating almost. And the other thing that's worth flagging on that is that, you know, it's a very collegiate atmosphere within the program, and people will typically help each other through the elements that they find more challenging. So, you know, the beauty of having such a diverse cohort is that regardless of the subject matter, there will be an expert in the room, and those experts tend to become quite popular, certainly when it's coming to exam time. So always a good idea to try and find yourself an accountant to sit next to during that part of the course. Yep, so someone has asked, should they submit their CV to a regional recruitment manager for review if you're interested in the program? And yes, that's actually a really important thing to do. We do get some people who apply for the program without engaging with one of us first, but so as not to kind of sort of waste anyone's time, or just to make sure that you do the best possible application. It's really important to reach out to one of the recruitment managers first, because they will be able to give you a steer, first of all, on whether you meet the admissions criteria, but providing you do meet the admissions criteria, they'll be able to give you a really useful steer on what to do with the on what to do with your application, how to approach the essays, who would be most appropriate in terms of referees, that kind of thing. So, you know, we're very much here to guide you through that process. And you shouldn't feel that after this information session that you need to just go away, log on and create your application. So do definitely reach out to the relevant recruitment manager for your region and get their thoughts on your CV before you press on. And a good question possibly to finish on. We are just kind of coming up to time, but someone has asked how many participants change sector following the Executive MBA, and I think it's difficult to put a sort of percentage figure on, but I think the one thing I would say is that the vast majority of people who do the Oxford Executive MBA are looking to effect some kind of change. Now that might be changing sector, it might be looking to start their own business, or they may have their own business already, which they're looking to scale, and the program provides a really useful vehicle for that also. But I think you know, there are a number of people who have come onto the program and managed to change sector. You know, I think that's, you know, probably if I was to put a number on it, you're probably talking around sort of 40 or 50% of people end up doing something quite different post completion of the program. I think Katie was a good example who I used at the start. So she is from a finance background. Technically, I guess she's still working in finance. She's a CFO, but rather than working for, you know, a big four practice or something like that, she's now working for a firm that invests in virtual reality, specifically within the mental health space, which is an area that she was passionate about. So I think what the program really does is it gives people an opportunity to take the skills that they've already gained, add to those skills, and if appropriate, pivot into a different sector that really follows their passion. So we've got time just for one more quick one that I've seen that has just popped up. That relates to the Linbury Scholarship. So unfortunately, the deadline for the Linbury Scholarship has now passed for the September intake, and it's only available for the September intake each year. So it's only available for one intake per academic year, not for the January class. So if that is something that you're interested in, it would now be a case of waiting for the September 21 intake. That would be the next available intake to apply, and it will be early April will be the deadline that you would need to apply. So we are now out of time, but I just want to say thank you very much to everyone for joining us today. I believe we had over 400 people register, which is incredible. Hope it's been useful. I'm sure there are plenty of other questions. I can see in front of me that there are plenty that I wasn't able to get to, so apologies for that. But do feel free to reach out to either myself or the relevant recruitment manager for your region to be able to provide you with any assistance that you need. In the meantime, stay safe and healthy, everyone. Challenging times that we live in, but we're certainly working through it here at Oxford, and we hope to see some of you here in the not too distant future. Thank you very much.